guess I should be probably also saying good evening or maybe even good morning to some of the people who are tuning in from other time zones in other parts of the world. So my name is Mohammed Saleh or Mohammed Salih at the anglicized pronunciation of my name, that I go by. I am the moderator of what I believe is going to be an interesting panel discussion today. This panel brings together Kurds from outside and inside the Kurdistan region to discuss a host of important issues related to Kurdistan, the Kurds, with a particular focus, of course, on the Kurdistan region or South Kurdistan in Iraq. We are here to discuss what the future is going to look like for the Kurds past the current COVID-19 pandemic. And I know that's a very hot topic now globally. Everybody is talking about that. And I hope you are all safe and healthy amid these unusual and rather difficult times. So one thing that I can tell you is that even a pandemic has not really slowed down the brutality that the Kurds are facing at the hands of their oppressors, their enemies in the region, and that is primarily the states and regimes that are ruling the Kurds against their own will, of course. At the moment, as we are speaking, you have ongoing deadly attacks by the Turkish and Iranian states against the Kurdish people within their borders, the borders of their states and beyond, in particular in the Kurdistan region of Iraq. Let me also say what really makes this panel interesting, I think, and perhaps even to some extent unique, is that it brings together a group of young Kurdish analysts, academics, and activists to discuss Kurdistan in English language. And this is not what you read whenever Kurdistan is being talked about in these kind of live streamed discussions. I know that I promised Ruwaida to be a moderator, but you might actually hear me also comment on things from time to time. It's very hard to really resist the temptation. So now allow me to introduce our distinguished and, as I'd like to emphasize again, young panelists. So I'll start with you, Lawin. Lawin Azad is joining us from Suleimani in Kurdistan. Lawin left the Kurdistan region in 1988 with her family and settled in London in the United Kingdom. But she returned in 2006 with a degree in law from Westminster University and a master's in international law from University College London. She has several years of experience in media and human rights and is a frequent commentator on Kurdish affairs and a strong supporter of women's empowerment, human rights, and a committed advocate of freedom of speech. I must say, Lawin, that I still remember your talk show on Kurdsat from several years ago. So
that's nice. Thank you.
Yeah, sure. Bamo Nouri is joining us from London. Dr. Nouri is a lecturer at City University of London and also an independent investigative journalist and writer with interest in American foreign policy and the international and domestic politics of the Middle East. And last but not least, here in the US, just a couple of hundred miles away from me is Diliman Abdulkader. Diliman was born in Kirkuk in South Kurdistan and along with his family spent 7 years at a refugee camp in Syria following the first Gulf War in 1991. Diliman comes from a foreign policy, national security background. He invested his time on Capitol Hill educating lawmakers and staffers on the plight of the Kurds. Diliman received his master's degree at the American University in Washington, D.C. in international peace and conflict resolution. As you can see, there is an early pattern emerging here where everybody on this panel, including myself, has been a refugee at some point in their lives. And I think that, sort of tells you a lot about the Kurdish situation in the region and the kind of circumstances that the Kurds are grappling with. In terms of the format of this panel, so each person, each panelist will present opening remarks for 5 minutes, and it will hopefully stay at that. And then I will start asking questions, and then we will open it for questions from members of the audience. And I look forward very much to getting your questions. So I will also obviously allow the panelists to engage with each other's comments and respond to each other as well. Just a very quick note before I pass it on to the panelists. If you hear me say Kurdistan, I generally mean by that the Kurdistan region, as it is the focus of our conversation here. And if I'm sort of referring to other parts of Kurdistan, which are currently part of the Turkish, Iranian, and Syrian states, I will make that clear. So with that, let's go to Lawin. We will start with you, Lawin. You have 5 minutes to give your opening remarks.
Thank you. Well, thank you for this opportunity to shed some light on the challenges that I feel are facing the Kurdistan region from a perspective of someone who actually lives here. I think it suffices that the Kurdistan region is facing a number of deep political, economic, and security issues, and unfortunately this isn't new. I've seen many versions of these problems over the years, and each time they've only increased in intensity and frequency. And what the average citizen has had to endure over these years comes down to predominantly poor governance, poor decision making, and a lack of vision from our leadership, and sometimes, to be quite frank, just a lack of leadership in honesty. And with each of these problems, we've spoken always about the necessity of change, and yet none of these changes have ever been profound enough or sustainable, because here we are again in 2020 talking about delayed salaries and cuts to salaries and problems with Baghdad over budget, over oil, and over security. So there's a number of problems, and in the interest of time, I'm just going to focus on the number one issue for someone like me who lives in the Kurdistan region, and that's the economy. And whilst it's true to say that the Kurdistan region isn't alone in navigating what seems like a state of economic paralysis, but a region that continues to rely solely on oil production for economic survival, it has left itself incredibly vulnerable and incredibly exposed. And what's concerning to me over the years that I've been here is that every time the KRG encounters a crisis, it becomes stagnant. It always appears to be playing catch up, forever on the defensive, never on the offensive. If we look back to 2014, when the oil prices were reduced by half, the economic repercussions of this in the Kurdistan region were incredibly severe. The KRG was forced not only to cut salaries, but seldom was it able to provide it on a monthly basis, and this continued for 4 years. This should have been the perfect opportunity for the KRG to reevaluate its sources of income, change the financial infrastructure, and diversify the economy. And prior to COVID-19, there was some emergence of a recovery. The economy seemed to be on the road to recovery, but this was short-lived. And sadly, it seems all periods of prosperity and calm in the Kurdistan region are always short-lived. Oil prices were halved again. The economic impact of COVID-19 was overwhelming. Salaries were delayed, cuts would follow. People were angry, they were protesting. The government's response was deemed inadequate, and people were, quite frankly, quite defiant. The KRG was unable to pay civil servants on time. It was unable to offer a stimulus package for people in the private sector. The COVID-19 infections and deaths were increasing, as was the rage of people. The health system was on the verge of collapse, and all we saw was government teams going to Baghdad with fruitless outcomes. Now, I know that sounds really negative, but I do believe in the potential of Kurdistan, and I still believe that despite everything, all is not lost. There is a number of things that can be done. Firstly, the KRG Baghdad talks must continue. We need to have a strong, unified team to Baghdad, and for this to work, we need a strong KRG that is built on true partnership. and a strong Kurdish vision, an inclusive government that allows for equal opportunity for involvement and participation. A strong Kurdish voice is going to be able to push Baghdad to adhere to the constitution, but to be realistic, KRG will have to make some concessions to be able to get its share of the budget. But these talks are important because it can lay the foundations for a long-term solution that is mutually beneficial and just. Secondly, there's probably no better time than now to hit the reset button, finally diversify the economy, focus on agriculture and the tourism sector. The private sector has to be empowered and invested in. Prior to COVID-19, it was great to see so many youngsters interested in working in the private sector. We saw many startups, many young entrepreneurs, and these definitely need to be encouraged because it takes the load off the government and it spearheads a new, more active private sector with the youth and society who are not looking to enroll on the already bloated government payroll. Thirdly, we need technocrats in government. Enough of just party affiliated people who don't know the ministries inside out. They don't know what they're doing there. We need experts in the field. The government must adopt a merit-based hiring system. The work of the ministers and the work of the ministries has to be up for review. Projects must be looked at and the ministers must be held accountable if they don't do the job. And quickly, decentralization. I know this is something that's been talked about, so I'll just quickly cover that. The KRG's current model of governance, I don't believe is working. It's outdated, has proven to be ineffective in dealing with major challenges. And over the years, it's evolved into something that is centralized and creating inefficient bureaucracy. I don't believe that a strong KRG means centralized government. On the contrary, I believe that local governments need to be empowered and for the allocation of revenue to be justly distributed. But the ambiguity around decentralizations have made these discussions very difficult. So it's for the advocates of this sort of governance to promote a white paper, make it available to the public, explain in very simple terms what it means, what the intention is, and how it will affect their lives. Because the current narrative that decentralization means break up the KRG is not true and is not the case. So I will leave it there, panelists, there 5 minutes, and then I can come back to some of these points. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, thank you so much, Lawian, for that very interesting account of the situation from the perspective of someone on the ground. So we will go to Bemo. So Bemo, you will have 5 minutes starting from now. You have to unmute.
Here we are. Okay, thank you. So I always say that it's important to listen to what powerful people say, but it's more important to compare what they say to what they actually do. Now, for the past, I'd say 5 years or so, I've in-depth looked at the decision-making of both the central government of Iraq and its Kurdish region. Now, at the turn of the century, especially after the fall of Saddam, this was meant to be the golden century for the Kurds, the first opportunity at having an autonomous region, the first ever country in history to recognize Kurdish as its official national language. Ultimately, all eyes were on the Kurdish regional government in terms of what would Kurdish democracy look like, given the soft power that we'd already established because of the history that we had in the region, which was rich in culture, it was rich with our affinity and support for democracy and for freedom and for liberalism. What instead has happened is an elitist system has arisen, and this elitist system that you see now in the Kurdish region can't be talked about unless you trace back exactly how it came about and its roots. Now, its roots are in the 2005 constitution making of Iraq, and those elite groups that the US worked with before the 2003 war, and how these 6 groups, and 2 of them are the power holders in the Kurdish region, these 6 groups ultimately influenced, contributed to, and finalized the constitution of Iraq that we have. These 6 groups that were made up of mostly exiles or groups that were out of touch with regular Iraqi society or victims of the former Ba'athist regime These individuals then set a precedent of how Iraq was to be run. Now, we know that Iraq is very, very divided in its core. What you have is a bunch of elites or elite groups that are severely divided on ethno, sectarian, and religious grounds, but they're united on sharing Iraq's resources. Now, this is the case in the central government of Iraq, and it's also the case in the Kurdish region of Iraq. Now, these elites have agreements between themselves. They have a particular strategy where they each want a share of Iraq's resources or pies, which we know that in any European country, a cabinet is normally formed within a month, 2 months maximum. In Iraq, after elections, it can take months upon months because these political parties get together and give each other concessions, ultimately pieces of the pie. And this is a kind of same argument that makes me believe that these elites don't necessarily want change. They don't want reform. Terms like reform and bettering the lives of the people are ultimately cliches that, due to the intellectual repression that exists, and how does that exist? You have a country that ultimately, and especially in the Kurdish region, where people are predominantly busy with worrying about wages, electricity and water, and the soft power or the rhetoric of the leaders always comes back to patriotism, our history and our struggle, and who can implement Kurdiety best. But the fact of the matter is that behind all of this, guys, there's a lack of transparency, there's a lack of accountability, there's zero democracy, and these elite decision makers aren't representative of the populace, they're representative of their own interests. So you see this in numerous different cases, be it failures in the areas of public service, failures of strategy, because these elites aren't necessarily economists, they're not unified. Because they're so divided at their core, they struggle to form a unified internal policy and a unified external policy. And one of the questions on the build-up to this was Kurdish relations externally. Due to the clientelism, it's more a case of two separate administrations, one of which has allowed Turkey to use the Kurdish region as a playground, and the other one has allowed the Kurdish region to become a cash cow. So my kind of core argument is that no matter how much you reform or you try to fix this foundationally flawed house, you're going to end up with the same outcomes, because in the core, or the nucleus or the heartbeat of this political system, is elites fighting for influence and fighting for their own interests. And these interests, given the political system and the precedents that's already been set, no matter how much you seek to reform it, it's going to, and the lack of transparency as well, is going to end up providing the same results. There's a whole load of things that I could elaborate upon, but I think I'll let you dictate some of the questions, and that'd be my opening 5 minutes.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Nouri, for these really interesting points as well. And so let's give the floor to Diliman, and then we'll get to the questions. Diliman?
Thank you, Kak Mohammed. Thank you, everybody, for joining, and also for Kurdish Progress for organizing this event. I want to focus more, and I don't want to sound like a broken record with the negative aspects of the Kurdistan region, but unfortunately, we have to understand our realities on the ground, and it happens to be negative. It's that we do not choose to pick these points out just to, to pick on certain groups, certain parties, certain individuals. I think this is critical for us to accept our.
Excuse me, Diliman.
Yes.
Sorry, Diliman, if you could give me a second. Sorry for the interruption. For the members of the audience, if you could actually mute your laptops or whatever devices you are using. Thank you. Sorry.
No problem. And so I would like to focus more. I can go back until 1992, but let's focus on this new government since it came into power last summer. I believe it was June or May, if I'm not mistaken. So the government's main goal, promised to address corruption and poor governance. I think that's where the most focus is. That's where most of our focus is, and that has been the expectation from the Kurds on the ground, the civilians, and also from the international community. But as we have witnessed, a year has passed now. The corruption has not been tackled because this certain corruption in the Kurdistan region, as the panelists have said before, is ruled by these two clans and these two parties that requires top-down approach. Our leadership, unfortunately, is not brave enough to take this approach. Rather focus on the little bits, the little issues on the ground. And we have seen proof of this over a year, from wire transfers to money in foreign accounts, in Halk Bank in Lebanon, telecom deals, and we just saw the recent Bloomberg piece, which was titled "The Billion-Dollar Broker Who Managed a Nation's Oil Wealth." These are all proof of within just corruption. And then we have millions of dollars of the nation's wealth that could be spent on the economy, as Lawen Khan mentioned, that was used on partisan wars for social media. The report came out from Grafika in June with the PUK, and the KDP does the same exact thing. The reality is that the same folks responsible for the corruption in the first place will unlikely tackle and hold themselves accountable. That's on one point with the corruption. Nepotism. Nepotism, I think, is another big issue within the Kurdistan Regional Government, and this has been on full display since this new government has taken power. We have seen this in representative offices abroad. We have seen this in universities in Kurdistan, and we have children becoming chancellors, for example. Just let that sink in. And we have the clan kids on stage on official events. The lack of transparency is another issue. We know that resource distribution and patronage system is still the mechanism for governing. This hasn't changed with this new cabinet, with this new government, unfortunately. And this was also another focus and goal of this government, but he has not fulfilled that. More issues I would like to touch point on is the mass protests have increased in the Kurdistan region, cracking down on protests in both Slemani areas, the green zones, and also KDP strongholds in Hawler and also in Duhok. And Duhok, we have to remember, this is considered Badinan region where protests usually don't come about. If it does, it's handled immediately. So this is not the other Iraq that we have in mind. This is not what the international community has in mind. And we don't say this with pleasure. I mean, this is our home. This is where our families live. This is an unfortunate point that I have to make. And arrests, raids, blackmail, threats have increased. And also another focus is lack of press freedom. Independent media does not exist. Cracking down on journalists, arresting critics has increased since last year. And I'm focusing on this year because this is a new cabinet. We can connect, of course, the past administrations. Cracking down on, if I may have a few more minutes, cracking down on members of parliament, lifting immunities of members of parliament. Salaries continue to be unpaid. And also the inconsistency with COVID-19. When this pandemic erupted, the current government actually did very well in addressing the issue. However, the opening back up, the lack of opening, the lack of funds to ordinary civilians, not knowing where their next paychecks are going to come from, has affected this issue. And then we can touch base. I just want to finish with this, Kak Mohammed. You have the lack of results in Washington. You have Turkish military intervention in the Kurdistan region. And you have a leadership, and I will end with this, my last sentence, that is out of touch with ordinary Kurds on the ground. There's a huge gap. They do not know what it is to survive on a day-to-day basis. They simply don't. And I think until this issue is filled, that these consistencies from the last previous administrations will continue on. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Diliman, and thanks to everyone for these really interesting opening presentations. Obviously, there is a lot to unpack, and hopefully we will get to do some of that in the remainder of the time that we have. So I'm now going to start with general questions, and then after that, we will go sort of to more specific questions for each panelist. So let's, start by painting a picture of what we are seeing as far as the Kurdistan region is concerned at the moment. You have got Turkey under Erdogan and his neo-Ottoman designs or hallucinations, whatever you want to call them. He's at the moment launching a military incursion, or perhaps better to say even invasion, from the northern side of the Kurdistan region. And there have been dozens of civilian casualties, dead and injured. And then you have from the southern side of the Kurdistan region, the Iraqi military sort of offering this belligerent and aggressive gesture and posture and trying to push militarily into the KRG controlled areas, although it was not, they did not really go very far with it. And then you have a pandemic, which is wreaking havoc in terms of the public health and safety sort of situation in Kurdistan, but also very importantly, economically as well. And you have got an economy which is generally on its knees at the moment. So my question to all of you is really, what's happening here? Are we sort of at a historical juncture where we are witnessing the Kurdistan region falling apart? Or is that too sort of pessimistic of sort of an assessment and evaluation, and there is room for optimism? I would like to hear your takes on that. So let's start with Lavin Khan, and then other speakers will have a chance as well. Thank you.
I think that's probably slightly pessimistic to say the whole thing is on the verge of collapse. I feel we've seen probably worse times, but the context was different. I've seen people here when they've gone to protest, someone doesn't have a daily income to feed their families, and obviously that's heartbreaking. I do agree with Diliman, the leadership are relatively out of touch with the people here, but bear in mind there are layers of society who are not doing too badly, but that you do have that layer that depends on a daily income, that depends on what they're able to get in the private sector. And if you have no stimulus package, if you have no other alternative for them to provide for their family, of course there's going to be protests, of course people are going to rise up. But I feel that there is potential for change, maybe this time more so than the other previous times, because of the frequency in which the Turkish invasions are coming about. The stronger the Iraqi government becomes, the Kurdish government will need to decide that we need to take a different stance on these topics and become more unified. As long as there is disunity among the political parties in Kurdistan, in governance, in decision making, in pushing for policy, you will have cracks. And unfortunately, the Iraqi government, the Iranians, the Turks, all our neighbors will take advantage of this. So it's a rather pessimistic outlook, but there is potential. I don't want to use the word reform because I know people don't believe in that anymore, but there is let's say, room for maneuver to change things.
Sorry, the point about disunity and lack of unity sort of in the Kurdistan region between different political factions is really important, and you have raised it a couple of times. So let's see what Dr. Nouri has to say about this. I should say, that I would like for us to go sort of beyond being mostly descriptive, because, people sort of our audiences as well have different ways of, getting information on the current state of affairs in the Kurdistan region. So I would like really to, for us to, delve more into the what should be done side of the thing, sort of try to lay out your vision in terms of how you think, things should be moving forward from here? What needs to be done?
Okay, perfect. So you want a proactive as opposed to reactive response, which makes a lot of sense. The issue is in the question that you asked, you said whether it's breaking down. I don't think it was ever fixed as one from the outset. I think there was cracks in the beginning. However, the political situation at the time was serving these different factions, these different political parties that are the power holders in that region. What the Kurdish region is never ready for, this is the Kurdish region of Iraq, is changes in the external situation. They weren't ready for ISIS, they weren't ready for coronavirus, they're literally not ready for anything. I think Lawin touched upon it before. They're very, very reactionary. So what has happened over time is external situations have taken place and the Kurds have had to respond and predominantly around economic policy, and to maintain their own authority and to serve their own interests, they've had to cut deals with different sides of their neighbours. For example, one of them is with Turkey and allowing Kurdish land to be a playground for Turkish foreign policy, which is quite clear what it is and where it's going. And on the other hand, the idea that let's keep everybody on civil servant salaries, let's keep the market completely regulated because these wages are going to serve our Iranian neighbours who have got business interests in our markets. The fact of the matter is that unless you completely change that policy, you unify the region and depoliticize every single institution, then the same things are going to keep happening. And each party will react differently. Each party will scramble and stumble to keep its authority or its power in check. And it's usually through the classic clientelist approach where I'll give you my economy or I'll give you my land or I'll enable you to exert your foreign policy in exchange for you can do what you like on my land. The market in the Kurdish region has suffered and has been debilitated because of this. So I don't think it's fallen apart. I think it was never fixed from the beginning. The solution is a big thing that hopefully, generally, I have a few solutions in mind, but I'll let Kag Diliman talk on this as well.
Yeah. Okay, so we will come back to that. So Kag Diliman, the floor is yours.
Thank you. And I think both speakers hit the nail on the head. Right on. The solution is unity. And the solution, I mean, in regards to the Turkish invasions and the weakening of the Kurdistan region's autonomy is a reality that we have to face. This is, it's heading that way, unfortunately. But we have to look at the issues internally in order for us to solve these external issues. Turkey would not be able to set up multiple military bases without communication, intelligence sharing, and partnership with ruling clans inside our own borders, right? The Iraqi government would not be able to take over large swaths of land if it's not in communication and cooperation with our own internal ruling clans. And I think this is the biggest issue, is that there's a lack of disunity within the KRG. Everybody wants to be leader. Everybody wants to be the next president, the next prime minister, and the next chancellor. But nobody wants to. Nobody wants to build on the actual institutions that are already in place. In order to do this, I think the first thing that we should do is, I'll give you a solution, is the disarming of the political parties is a must. We cannot have armed political parties and then these same parties are in control of every institution and position. Because if you do disagree, then these arms will turn around against you. So I think in order to get to that, face that external threat, we have to handle ourselves internally first.
Great, thank you. So let's get sort of more deeply and specifically to the question of governance and reforms in the Kurdistan region. Of course, you know, with every new administration and every few years, you know, the whole sort of idea of reform comes up. And it's sort of, if you look at the term, it's really you know, a floating signifier that everybody reads their own meaning into this whole notion and idea of reform. So I was, you know, curious in terms of when you hear the term reform sort of uttered by politicians and leaders of the KRG and the political parties in Kurdistan, what does, like, you know, what sort of meaning do you get or gather from the word? Like, how do you understand, you know, these utterances of reform by the senior leaders of the KRG? Kagbame, you can go first this time if you like.
Okay, I see reform as nothing more than a cliche. Call it pessimistic, but I call it as it is. One of the funny things is, and this is probably what I have the biggest qualm with, is I constantly see senior leaders of the KRG, and I'm refusing to name any parties specifically, but all I seem to see is had a productive meeting about bettering the lives of the Iraqi people or the Kurdish people or whatever you want to call it, and had a productive meeting about working together and improving bilateral relations. It's all a massive, guys, because if you look at the correlation between these meetings and improvements and positive changes, especially in issues that were probably better before these individuals took authority and took over these ministries, then you see that really these meetings don't do anything. They're just a public display, just to kind of, you know, tick or cross the T's that, you know, we're a democracy, we hold meetings, etc. And one of the solutions is that they say the Kurdish house will never listen internally to its own problems and to its own people. But when you shake the box or you shake the house or you knock the door from outside, then they're forced to listen. And what these leaders have not really acknowledged is that there's millions of Kurds that are embedded in different democracies and successful countries all around the world, in different fabrics of society. If, in an extreme case, there was to be a movement where these foreign diplomats that hold meetings with our KRG leaders were to have pressure put on them through protests and through the mass populace that we have here from Kurds and people that support the Kurdish movement, I guarantee you all of the support, be it in arms, economics, diplomatic, would cease, and these leaders will be in a different position. But just simply because it's abe to attack yourself and we don't do it and we don't take it that far. But I think this is the imminent next step, which if there are policymakers, they need to acknowledge that, because the power from without is a lot greater than the power within, but we have been trying for years from within.
Okay, thank you so much, Bamo. Lawian Khan?
To your question, I think when we talk about reform, especially when we live in the Kurdistan region, especially because during election time, the campaigns predominantly seem to focus on economic reform because they know that's what resonates with your average citizen. Economic reform means your salaries on time, means maybe an increase in your salaries, means a more private, a vibrant private sector. But this is, in the most part, I believe anyway, a distraction, because we've never really seen substantial, profound economic reform that really benefits. Had we seen it, like I said, we would have had some sort of stability since, you know, the inception of the Kurdistan Regional Government, the parliament. But we keep going through the same problems with salary. We keep having the same problems with Baghdad. One of the issues I think both Bamo and Dilman touched on is that we're not empowering institutions. The political parties, and I refer to all of them, sadly, place people in positions of power to carry out certain projects that would probably benefit the area from which they predominantly govern or benefit the people at large, but they're not empowering the institutions. So once these people leave, the institutions remain weak, the policies remain weak, and the implementation of projects that are left to be finished are not never completed. So unless we have that, unless we empower the entities within the government, we empower the core, won't really see fundamental changes because they all seem very hollow, because we haven't seen any real substantial changes. Just one other issue in terms of the pressure of external people on the KRG. I believe we've had that. We have had external pressure on the KRG in terms of unifying the Peshmerga forces. Absolutely agree. Political parties should not have armed forces. I believe the Germans were working with the Ministry of Peshmerga for a number of years now to try to unify the 1780s forces. I hope one day they will do it, because maybe without armed forces we can have a more productive conversation at the table.
Thank you so much, Lauren Khan. Diliman?
The word, and I don't, again, we don't want to sound too negative, but reform unfortunately has been used by this leadership and previous governments within the KRG as a show for the international community. It's been used as just a fancy word. This is what democratic, loving Westerners love to hear. This is the word we must use. But the reality on the ground is different. The KRG cannot continue playing the victimhood narrative. The KRG cannot continue on its same patriotic talking points. Or rather do that than tackle the hard issues and immediate issues before them. Because ordinary Kurds are not buying these tired talking points. They are really not buying these tired talking points. And it's the same narrative over and over again, as Lauren Khan mentioned. And I'll tell you this, reform does not consist of fancy videos. Reform does not consist of tweets. Reform does not consist of having countless meetings and cabinets without results. Reform consists of change of faces, actual change of faces. You cannot expect these same individuals to create reform and create change if they have been practicing the opposite for decades. How are we? Because they are invested in these partnerships to work, and we cannot continue on the same path. So that's why I think both parties have to be brave enough, if they do truly have the Kurdistan region in mind, if they have true intentions in mind. If we are wrong, if I am wrong, if they want the Kurdish nation to succeed, then they have to set aside these petty, and these are petty differences. I mean, if you think about it, these are literally clan differences. The Kurdistan Regional Government cannot be run like a business, because of a bad business without pillars will eventually have to file for bankruptcy. And that's why institution building is part of this reform, and that's why it's necessary and very critical for the Kurdistan region to survive.
Can I just make a point about the people are getting tired of hearing the same rhetoric? I agree. I think the sad thing to see over the years since I've been in Kurdistan is that people's sense of Kurdish identity has almost been compromised by the political parties, because every issue seems to be politicized. And so there's this huge polarization within society. But that doesn't mean, it's all negative. And I don't want to say that. I think that if people were empowered to know that they do have an impact, take the power from the parties and bring it back to the people. I do believe that to a certain degree, democracy does exist in Kurdistan. I do believe, that through the voting process, whatever you make of it, you can achieve some results. But I think one of the issues is also that the lack of opposition party impact on the Kurdistan Regional Government in any sort of reform has to be taken into account. We had an offshoot of PUK, there was Goran movement. The fact that they achieved 25 seats in the first go showed you the disillusion that people had with the incumbent parties. But unfortunately, they weren't able to expand on that. Then we had New Generation. They too weren't able to expand on that populist movement. So I think, in part, yes, the ruling parties bear the biggest share of it, obviously, but we have to also try to realize, why haven't the opposition parties had an impact, especially someone who was able to achieve 25 seats in their first round of elections?
I think that the answer to that is quite simple. When change is implemented, or democratic changes or democracy is in action, we saw in 2015 the parliament get closed through private militias that you can't call Peshmerga forces anymore because it's dishonorable to the history of the Kurds. You've got private political party militias that basically ended up not allowing ministers to go to the parliament buildings to carry out their jobs, and the parliament was closed for almost 2 years. The other thing is there's a massive disillusionment with political change. There's an embedded and ingrained belief now that the voting process is irrelevant. So if you're looking, I think it was 2009, it was 74 point something % voter turnout. By 2018, it became 51%. The surveys and data on people's beliefs in the ballot box or change from the ballot box is decreasing by the day. And it's probably even worse now. And these political parties, without arms, without the same resources and powers, can't compete in a system that's already predetermined. And the other thing that I'd like to add is I don't see how any reform is possible economically. And I'll explain that through, let's say, one case. The agreement with one of the political parties and Iran is based on the idea that Iranian goods and services and even workers can operate in the Kurdish region in exchange for numerous other services that this political party take. Now, this is based on the premise that this political party give wages within this region. Those wages end up then being spent by our populace on products and services, and the money goes back to Iran, right? If you have a free market in this equation and each individual is truly able to go and set up a business and you know, the American dream or whatever you want to call it, then the interests of the clienteles or the states operating within this region wouldn't be served. So my argument is that reform would never take place in the way that we imagine or we think, because this disturbs the interests of those that through our ruling parties have interest and are operating in the Kurdish region. And no matter how much we try to say, oh, it's possible or they can make certain changes, the fundamentals are that these two parties serve other interests and they're not representative of their populace.
And if I may add to that real quick, Dr. Muhammad, just so the audience understand, what we think of reform is much different than what the KRG leadership thinks of reform. To put it into perspective for those who are living in the West, imagine, or in the US specifically, imagine if the Democratic Party and the Republican Party had armed men. They had literally armed men guarding their headquarters, guarding these cities, guarding Washington, D.C., and not allowing a member of parliament entering the nation's capital. Just imagine, that is what's happening. And I think that's what Dr. Bamo's point is in this, is that you can't achieve or even get to these goals of economic reform and investment in our youth without, and handling even the external threats, without removing the guns pointed at Kurds versus Kurds. That's why the Peshmerga reform, the Peshmerga is so critical. However, because of the corruption and the nepotism within these ruling clans, it's not in their interest to unite the Peshmerga forces. It's really not in their interest. It's in our interest as ordinary Kurds, but it's not in their interest, because then they would be a regular old party that can be defeated at the ballot box. And that's why they rely on armed resistance, not armed resistance, I shouldn't say that. We use that term elsewhere in parts of Kurdistan, but they rely on armed men to do the dirty work for them, if you will.
Well, thank you so much, Diliman. I'm so sorry that my connection was cut off for a moment. They're doing some renovation in the apartment where I'm staying, so I apologize, and I hope that will not happen again. Just to chime in on the issue of reform, I think, you know what, I totally agree with what our speaker said here. But my sense is that very often there is sort of a lack of really sort of proper understanding of the term whenever, you know, we hear this term being thrown around or used by the politicians in the KRG. And I think part of it is because the expectations of reform on the part of the people, on the part of the individuals in the KRG, is really high. Not, of course, I'm not saying that there is anything wrong with that, but in the sense that we have really sort of a number of very serious structural problems, both within the entity of the KRG and also in terms of, KRG being an autonomous region, which is part of a state that is not really treating it, at least even according to the existing constitution of the country, and which is constantly trying to decrease the extent of KRG's autonomous powers, is usually resorting to policies of economic strangulation. We saw that under Maliki. We have seen different forms of that under the successive prime ministers after him, Abadi, Abdul Mahdi at the end of his term, and now with Kazemi. So I'm afraid that, part of what we think should happen in terms of reform within the KRG is not really going to happen, because the structure, the capacities for that kind of change do not exist. For example, one of the very major thorny issues is the whole question of paying the salaries, or just cashing the oil which is being extracted by the KRG. Because you are not really a sovereign state, it's very difficult to deal with the outside parties. If you want to lure investment into the oil and gas sector in the KRG, for example, you have to go through these, production sharing agreements, which are not ideal in any way. But no other oil company would really come and, for example, do oil extraction for you on the terms that they do for Baghdad, or, do, for example, for a neighboring country like Iran. And then you even have really these very, important problems in terms of getting the cash back into the KRG's coffers, right? We've been reading about these really, shaky deals which are being conducted through middlemen. And we have seen stories on that in the recent days and weeks, where we basically see that the government, even when it manages to actually sell the oil, is running into very serious problems in terms of getting the money back into the government coffers and being able to use that, for example, to provide the salaries as much as possible. Of course, I'm not discounting, the fact that the whole notion of reform, the whole idea of reform, when it is used, when it is uttered by the politicians, should be understood in really very limited sense. Even from their own perspective, there is a lack of a will for genuine structural comprehensive reforms within the KRG. That's very obvious, and I think the entire story of the past 3 decades and the recent years has made that very clear. But I think if Kurdistan had the benefit of being a state, the extent of the problems, I think, one way or another, would have been less, damaging as compared to what they seem to be right now. So I just wanted to say that to, bring out that perspective as well, that there are really very certain serious limitations that are out there that exist objectively of the KRG's will. And, it is very difficult to circumvent and go around these kind of barriers. So I would like to go to another very important question, which builds upon what we have been discussing so far. And that is basically the KRG's, or the Kurdistan region, or more broadly speaking, the Kurds' future within the state of Iran. So we have, by now, a century of experience of being part of this state, of course, starting forcibly against the will of the Kurdish people in the region, and that was despite all the shortcomings of the 2017 referendum. Was also again reiterated that it is a forcible sort of arrangement that that keeps the Kurds as part of Iraq. But so we sort of have had different episodes. We have had Kurdish resistance, armed resistance vis-a-vis the Iraqi state. Before that, for a period, vis-a-vis the British colonialism in the country. And then you have had periods where you have had, deals emerging as a result of negotiations between the governments in Baghdad and, the Kurdish movement, or the different arms of the Kurdish movement, and in the more recent years, in the form of the KRG. It seems, like this is a very long show, and we have almost gone through all the episodes of this. Almost everything has been tried, from, armed resistance to negotiations to making deals. And then we seem to somehow go back to square one, where everything seems to be breaking down, and everyone wants to start over again. So my question, to sort of wrap this long sort of introduction to this question, is there really a future for the Kurds within Iraq? What does the future for the Kurds within the Kurds who are part of the current existing Iraqi state look like? Should this future be part of this state? Can we imagine a sort of future where the Kurdish individual would feel they are being treated with dignity, and that they can be happily more or less part of the structure of the Iraqi state? Or, that we have to imagine a different future? Lawen Khan, let's start with you.
What can I say? I think the independence of Kurdistan is always something that we're going to imagine, whether it's now, whether it's 5 years, 10 years, 100 years down the line. I think an independent Kurdistan has to be something we all work for eventually, and hopefully it'll come to fruition, and maybe not my lifetime, maybe my kids or their kids. Whether or not that's going to happen is, I suppose, like you said in the beginning, we were forcibly put into this state. So probably that means we will forcibly have to come out. As you mentioned, we did a referendum. The referendum was simply to ask a question if you wanted or believed in an independent Kurdistan. It was non-binding. And the reaction of the international community, the reaction of the neighboring countries, was really disproportionate to what was being asked. So I can't imagine how we can have a peaceful transition out of Iraq. I don't know what a secession from Iraq looks like if we just leave. I think we'll be at the mercies of our neighbors, and without the help of the international community, it would probably be a non-starter, which is why I stressed in the beginning that it's imperative we have good relations with Baghdad, but from a unified Kurdish stance. We cannot go there and politicize what we're asking for. We need to have a strong stance on certain issues. We need to make sure that we refer back to the Constitution as a framework for these conversations that we have, and that dialogue are entrenched in these Constitution. Another factor would also be to finally implement our own Constitution. It's still a draft at this stage. Maybe that's something we need to consider. I don't think, what's sad to say at this point, with the economy being so bad, people don't care for a free Kurdistan. They just want their salaries on time. They want their livelihoods. They want a better standard of living. And sadly, that is caused by the lack of bad policy, bad decision-making, bad governance. But that's not to say that we can't turn the tide. I just think, like you mentioned, we've gone through all of this history and all these eras of resistance and struggle and sacrifice for people to say, Kurdish independence is not an issue for me. It's very sad. But we have to work with what we have. And right now, that is Baghdad. I believe that Prime Minister Kadhimi is probably better than his predecessors. It's someone that the West seems to be confident in his capabilities. Yes, he comes from an intel background, but he's also a journalist and human rights. So I'm hoping that gives him a softer side to his character that will be more accepting and willing to try to push for some of these Kurdish issues. But better dialogue with Baghdad from a more unified Kurdish stance would probably be our best bet for now.
Great, thank you so much, Lawin. Dilima.
So I think self-determination is my personal perspective is that self-determination is the only solution for the Kurdish nation, and especially for the Kurds and the KRG, even if relations are doing well with Baghdad, because the Kurds, this is a human right. This is a basic human right. It is not an ask for the Kurds to have their own state. It is a right. Once we distinct that from, because if it was the other way around, if you think about it from an Iraqi perspective, the Kurds were the majority, the Iraqis would likely want to separate as well. With that said, I think in order for us to, and I think that there's many Kurds like me who still achieve and who still strive for self-determination in a state of their own. I'm still very hopeful. I think that can be attained. Again, this comes back to the internal factors. That's why me personally, I'm very critical of the internal factors, is because in order for us to have self-determination, to have our own state, we have to fix our own house. If you don't have a functioning parliament, you cannot have self-determination. And this is why I was against the 2017 referendum. If you don't have a united Peshmerga, you cannot defeat the external threat. If you don't have a economy that works, that functions, you cannot have self-determination. Lastly, if you don't have the support of the international community and the path that the KRG is currently going on, which is damaging its reputation, you will never get that self-determination. For us Kurds as non-state actors, you need a strong power behind you to do this. Because armed, sure, we can say we're going to fight our way, we can be patriotic Kurds, but there's also another path. There's been many states that have had strong powers behind them and who have their own state now. So I think self-determination should never go away. I think that should be the goal of all Kurds across Kurdistan, not only in the KRG. But we do have much higher expectations, especially me, for the KRG, because you have been in governance since 92. There should have been some kind of result up until now. That is the reason why we are so critical of this specific part. Not because we're anti-KDP, for me, it doesn't matter who leads. If they do something good, I'll give them. But the problem is the consistent negative results damages the reputation of this other Iraq that we hope for originally, which was also a campaign that was introduced by the ruling parties.
Well, thank you, Dilima. And I'd like to reiterate again, for those who are not, for everyone else, please mute your mics. If you're on, please mute it. So, Vamo?
Yep. I just think, is it Baghdad that oppresses Kurdish people in its own region, or is it the Kurdish party leadership and these political militias that we have that oppress the Kurdish people? Is it Baghdad that's making all the mistakes, or is it leadership? And it kind of comes back to the argument that how can you measure the success of a particular policy of a decision maker if there's no transparency to see how they go about achieving this particular policy? If there's no clarity in what that policy, both internally and externally, is. We have a situation in the Kurdish region where a politician can be elected based on popularity and making generic promises of no delays in salaries, higher salaries, independent Kurdistan. Due to popularity, they'll get elected to the parliament. What does our leadership do? Constantly making these same promises, rhetorics, narratives. This referendum was nothing more than a distraction attempt at a very, very crucial period where internally the situation within this region was very, very hostile. And as far as I see it, I don't see a Baghdad that subverts Kurdish democracy and Kurdish rights. I don't see Kurds that feel that they are second-class citizens to Iraqis. I feel Kurds in this situation feel the complete opposite. They feel it's their own rulers that are inadequate and unable to govern adequately. And it's also very, very concerning, because I look at what people do and I compare it to what they say in terms of decision makers. How can you have years of dialogue and disagreement in the public sphere between, let's say, a leader from one ruling party over wages with, let's say, Haider Abadi, but then as soon as the next set of elections happens, these two are sitting together, kissing each other and trying to form a cabinet? This hasn't happened once. It's happened after every single election. So therefore, if you aren't intellectually repressed, and if you have heightened senses to actually see what's going on, you can put, they say information is, or knowledge, sorry, is information when you connect the dots. So when you form this information, you organize this knowledge, you actually see that this whole kind of show is very, very theatric, but there's no substance to it. These individuals, they get together. They exchange ministerial fiefdoms, the Kurdish region and Baghdad, when they need to. And then when there's issues internally, they blame each other. This has always happened, and it's going to continue to happen. So an independent Kurdistan is something that probably every Kurd wants in the bottom of their heart. I'm of that generation where my parents raised me in England to one day go and serve and get all these degrees to help my people. But the fact of the matter is that we're in a repressive state now that doesn't matter what you contribute, if it goes beyond the elite narratives, and you don't have a space there. So an independent Kurdistan with these ruling elites and these frameworks that we have and these undemocratic institutions, the nepotism, the partisan institutions, is probably the most dangerous outcome for Kurds, because you're seeing what's happening now in this period through a semi-autonomous region. God knows what will happen if it was fully independent.
Kak Mohammed, if I may touch on
sure,
one
yeah.
point.
Yeah, go ahead.
You know, Kurdistan is filled with talent. We have to realize that. There are many, many, many smart, talented youth within our nation, even especially in Bashur as well. Why aren't we not using our talent, right? This is a very basic question. And, you know, we have to realize that Kurdistan is filled with greater talent outside of the clans than inside of the clans. But many of those outside of the clans who are educated, who maybe in the diaspora, but also inside the Kurdistan region, are sidelined. We should not sideline them because they are critical. We should not, because these young people have ideas. They want to push the nation forward. We have to take advantage of these young nations. We have to take advantage of these perspectives. This is not, you know, back in the 80s and 90s when you were fighting Saddam. This is 2020. There's technology. There's everybody's educated. We have seen the world. We've witnessed democracy work in person. We have to bring these ideas back home and allow it to flourish. But again, it's not possible. It's not possible if we continue to sideline the critics, if we continue to blackmail, if we continue to threaten, if we continue to belittle and say, you know, the most famous line is Josh, or, you know, all this nonsense. This is very simplistic targets that we should shy away from. Instead, we should welcome and hug our youth, if I may.
And can I just add one thing very, very quickly?
Yeah, sure.
This brings me on to foreign policy. So I teach American history, American foreign policy, and American domestic politics. I teach about how...
I have questions on that, Bamo. I have a specific questions on that coming up. So if you don't mind, holding up just, for a couple of minutes.
I won't talk about that then, but what I will say is those decision makers that brought the decision of the referendum forward had zero understanding of the international arena, the requirements of the time, the direction or the power dynamics of the world at that particular time, nor did they have any understanding about what Kurdish foreign policy should entail and what the Kurdish role is in the bigger picture. Instead, it was all egoism and one individual trying to be a hero, making a drastic decision that has ultimately put a massive cross on the Kurdish question in the other parts of Greater Kurdistan. But we'll talk about foreign policy after.
Okay, thank you. So let's very quickly just, touch on this idea of a strong Iraqi state. It's now, an idea that is being floated around by different sorts of people, whether in Baghdad, in some of the, sort of policy circles at the government and think tank levels in the West as well. What should really, how should we as Kurds understand the whole notion of a strong Iraqi state? Is a strong Iraqi state something that is, going to be good for the Kurds, or is this something that we have to be really sort of looking at more critically and be aware of the long-term implications of building a strong Iraqi state in light of nearly a century of Kurdish sort of experience with the Iraqi state since the very beginning in 1920s. Lamin Khan, would you like to go first? Very quickly, because I'm now going to gradually start seeing sort of asking the members of the audience to ask questions. So,
okay. Well, I'll be quick. I think the issue of a strong Iraq has always been on the agenda. You mentioned, foreign policy in the international community. The international community has always had a one Iraq policy. The referendum was a clear evidence of that. They don't want any secession. They want Iraq to stay as it is. It depends what you mean by a strong Iraq. What does this mean? Is this power concentrated in parliament, which will be fine? Powers concentrated in the institutions, or powers concentrated in the militias? I think Iraq should not come at the expense of the Kurdistan region or the Kurdistan Regional Government, and that is something we'd always have to consider. We need to continue talking to the diplomatic community to ensure that a strong Iraq doesn't mean encroachment on any of our human rights or civil rights or any of our liberties as the Kurdistan region.
Great, thank you. I hope everyone else will be as brief as well. Diliman?
Any country could be strong, but we have to be careful because we have to learn from our experiences and witness what a strong opposite state has done to the Kurdish nation. I think we should always strive for a strong Kurdistan. We should strengthen our autonomy as much as we can at all times, even if relations it's at its greatest and highest point with the Baghdad government. But we have to be careful. What does a strong Iraq mean? As of now, a strong Iraq is undermined by Shiite militias. There's political and economic and military apparatus is heavily undermined by its neighbors. It cannot control its territories and its sovereign borders. So what does that mean for us? With the Kurds, I think we should worry about strengthening internal institutions so that when there is a strong Iraq, we have cards to play. Because Baghdad will not be hesitant to use those cards, if we recall in 2017 in Kirkuk.
Great, thank you. Bamo?
I think given the location of the Kurdish region and obviously Iraq, any idea that a weakened Iraq would benefit the Kurdish region is preposterous, to be honest. And any nation, any powerful nation, any regional power, if you look at different powers, be it China, be it Russia, they all bank on their neighbors or their immediate neighbors being in a stable position. So Iraq has to be stable for Kurdistan to also not be disrupted in its stability. So I definitely believe in a strengthened Iraq and a democratic Iraq and a non-Iranian influenced Iraq or less Iranian influenced Iraq, definitely.
But I would debate back, Dr. Obama, I would argue back that that hasn't been the case. We've seen since 2003 the weakening institutions within the Iraqi government, but Kurdistan has prospered. Security-wise, Kurdistan it's been our highest point. Our mistake was not looking ahead and envisioning 5-10 years, especially when Daesh came about. So I think we just lacked vision. As you mentioned, it was personal interest and whatnot that led with a referendum. But I think, I mean, I shouldn't probably say this, not politically correct, but I think if Kurdistan happens to be stronger than Baghdad, I think that's a huge plus. And I think we should be aware and hesitant if Iraq is ever stronger than Kurdistan.
But I think you can only get a strong Kurdistan if you have stronger institutions and the rule of law. And a strong Iraq should be a strong Iraqi state and not one that is influenced by its neighboring countries or Iranian proxies. Because then you'll.
Well, thank you for raising these really great points. I would like also, just to add my own sort of understanding of the whole idea of a strong Iraqi state. I think as we think about the future, it's really very important to think about the history as well, right? We do not live in a vacuum. What is going to happen in the future is not going to sort of have no relation or continuity with the past. And I think it's very important to think of the very founding moment of the Iraqi state. It was a British colonial creation. It was not really, the prime motive for creating the state of Iraq was securing British colonial interests within that territory and also, the neighborhood as well. And what we see, the mere fact of putting together three communities that at least on the sort of ethnic side between the Kurds and Arabs at that particular moment did not want to be together as part of one state. And also what we have seen in the decades since then in terms of at least for 7 or 8 decades of that history, the Sunni Arab minority wanting to dominate the state. And also the fact that, I think the particular moment has some important parallels to the earlier decades of the Iraqi state from the 20s up until 40s and 50s, where there was, some Kurdish enthusiasm, at least at some point, to be part of the state. Some of the, Kurdish military and social figures contributed in important ways to the building of the Iraqi state. There was some hope that, this state was being sort of, marching on a path which was going to cross toward a better point. And then at some point in late 50s, you basically start having these military coups. So whatever notion of a democratic, I'm sure, a strong state that was being floated around at that point, that certain sections of the Kurdish population were also, supportive of, or at least were sort of watching eagerly to see if that materializes and what that would mean in terms of their future and rights. That whole thing was completely shattered by the military coups. And what we saw after that, we at the sort of the end point of that process with the Ba'ath regime and the genocide that it committed against the Kurds. And I think as we think about a strong Iraqi state, we should be really worried and wary both, because we are not, even if we have the best assumptions about this state, that it is going to be non-sectarian, sort of non-chauvinistic in terms of ethnic and sectarian attitude, that it is going to be some form of a democratic state. How can we really be sure that whatever, intentions in good faith that are out there, even on the other side of the aisle in Baghdad, are not going to be completely disrupted and destroyed at some point by a military coup? And I think the possibility of that is not really very far-fetched. If you look at the sort of internal Shia political scene at the moment, the militia groups and their sort of political blocs in parliament, which are very closely, affiliated with, and you could definitely even say controlled by Iran, these groups are not going to give up their current power and privileges. And that the state of Iraq really stands on the verge of a civil war, if not some form of a military coup at some point. And my fear is, sort of playing naively into this whole notion of a strong democratic notion of Iraq and giving up whatever leverages in terms of force and power that the Kurds have, which are, the Peshmerga and the economy as flawed and problematic as the management of these two important, elements and factors has been. So my fear is, if we are going to really give up our leverages of power at the Kurdistan region to Iraq, hoping that something good is going to come out of this Iraq will be, it is really something that our history within this state warns us against. And I think, the game has to be definitely played a lot more cautiously and taking the history, the longer view of history into account in that regard. So with that, let me, tell our audience that they can post their questions in the chat box. You can actually post it publicly, or you can send it to me. If you can do that, that's fine. So let me get to more specific questions, and I would like to start with Lawen again. You have worked in Kurdistan for a number of years as a journalist, as someone who's passionate and advocating for better human rights and freedom of press in Kurdistan. How do you see the situation at the moment, and how do you see the future prospects in terms of that? Is Kurdistan sort of heading toward a situation where, the extent, whatever sort of space or margin of freedom of expression and press that there is going to deteriorate? Or, things are not going to be as bad as sort of, some critics might think. What is your take on that?
Obviously, any strangulation of freedom of speech is something I oppose. I think only through dialogue and different opinions can we have a more informed conversation. I think that what we're seeing is going to deteriorate or get to a point where we're going to have a police state over media where nobody is free to say what they want. I think, unfortunately, you will see a lockdown, on certain provinces. You'll see, their money is more boisterous. The protests always originate from there. People are more likely to come out and be critical of, people in power, of policy, of government. You'll see less so in Erbil and in Duhok. But and as we said in the beginning, you are now seeing protests in Duhok. Yes, there's a crackdown, but people are still coming out to say stuff. I think with international pressure and with internal pressure on the government to leave freedom of speech alone, let people express themselves how they want, we won't go down that road where you'll have no freedom of expression. I don't believe that. Yes, there's probably no real independent media in Kurdistan, aside from maybe some of the newspapers. Everyone is affiliated to some political party or some individual, so there is a bias, but that doesn't mean we should disregard their opinions either. Have a look, get informed decisions. I know that there is still a lot more freedom than elsewhere in the Middle East for people to have their opinions. And whilst it's of concern, obviously, these crackdowns, I don't believe that we're anywhere near where we should be really worried.
Thank you. Kagbamo, coming to you now. So you wanted to talk about the Kurdish foreign policy, and I would like to offer you that chance right now. So how do you see, first of all, can we talk about a Kurdish foreign policy in the context of the Kurdistan region? Is there, such a thing as a sort of KRG foreign policy in the sense that represents the entire region? And how do you assess Kurdistan's relations with the neighboring countries, and in particular Turkey and Iran so far? And how do you think that policy has to be moving forward from here?
I think the foreign policy so far is a policy by an administration that is centered in Slimani and a separate, different foreign policy from an administration in Erbil. My question to the Kurdish leadership is, why are we still doing what we did 30, 40 and 50 years ago? We're waiting for foreign governments, and even as a population, we're waiting for intervention from without to change our situation from within. Now, in terms of the foreign policy, any other nation, any progressive nation, locates its relevance and what it can offer to the world on a broader spectrum, right? So to understand what you can do for the world, for example, if you look at American foreign policy, it started with elite foundations of Ford, Carnegie, Rockefeller that wanted to make America relevant on a global stage. So they started to invest in courses on Indonesian studies, African studies, Asian studies, for example, and did do exchange programs and make sure their scholars understood those countries and those countries understood them. We don't have any mechanism of understanding any other nation's goals, ambitions, aspirations. All we do is when our door is knocked upon and we're requested, our elites say, okay, how does it serve me? This is how it serves our party or our individuals. Let's agree to it. What we need as Kurds is depoliticized political system completely. All the core institutions need to be completely depoliticized. We need laws in place that punish individuals who abuse ministries and budgets for their own personal gain. And we need to have a unified meaning and a unified definition of, firstly, what it means to be Kurdish. Secondly, what do Kurds want to achieve, 5-year, 10-year plan, etc. And thirdly, how are we going to do this? Now, the foreign policy part is then how we analyze our relevance and what we can offer to the neighboring countries. Now, that offer can't be to our detriment, i.e. what's happening now with Turkey's foreign policy and Turkish interests in exchange for money and military support. Is a huge part of the Kurdish region which is now compromised. On the other side of the pool is the other administration in Slimani, who's given away the economy of the Kurdish region, completely destroyed its self-sustenance for its own elite and personal interests. And to unify the foreign policy, you need a hell of a lot of depoliticization. But the problem is when you depoliticize and you take away the power of individual parties and therefore individual elites, then these elites basically no longer get served from the system. And this is where I think there's a massive, massive behind the scenes kind of movement against any sort of powerful or substantial reform that will turn over this system from functioning the way it does. Because at the moment, politicians and those that are in charge of ministries have way too much power. And each politician, through their political, let's say, motivations and their partisan motivations, steer the direction unchecked, zero accountability, and the detriment is paid for by the Iraqi populace.
Great, thank you. Do you want to say something briefly about also KRG's relation with Turkey and Iran? Any?
Yeah, in terms of, I mean, probably Lawin will tell you about the market in, let's say, Slimani and what's happened over the past 5 to kind of 7 years. You're seeing a lot of clientelism. So, for example, individual deals being cut between political parties on behalf of the Kurdish people, completely unrepresentative. One of them is over territory and a political presence of the Turkish military in Kurdistan around Duhok, Zakho. We've seen the bombings, we've seen how their rights have extended even after the Iraqi government has called for a retreat from Turkey and a kind of stronger stance from the KRG. But for the elite interests of the party that control this region, this has continued, and we already know Iran's role in Slimani and how deep and embedded that is.
Well, thank you. Diliman, you have been working in Washington for a number of years now on promoting basically Kurdish causes in DC. and you're someone who followed the American-Kurdish relationship very closely. So I would like to basically get your take on how would you describe the American-Kurdish relationship? It seems to me personally that a lot of us Kurds have, out of good faith, a lot of hope in the U.S. and somehow view the U.S. Government or different governments and administrations as some sort of savior and helper, but isn't sort of, at least, not going very far back into history, like in the 1970s and what happened under Kissinger, for example. But at least, looking from 2017 up until now, and looking at the cases of the Kurdistan region in Iraq and Rojava in Syria, how would you really describe this relationship? Is this sort of more of a one-sided relationship where the U.S. establishes, some sort of involvement and relationship with the Kurds and engages with them when it needs them for other purposes in the region, be it, the so-called war on terror, or be it, its policy of countering the Iranian influence in the region? Or is there really a basis for a genuine relationship out there that could be mutually beneficial?
Thank you. Before I touch on that, just briefly, I think before relying on any foreign powers, even the US, that the Kurds have to rely on themselves. We have to think about our own self-interest first, to the fullest extent, to the fullest meaning of that term. And that means the unity internally of institution building. Because if we don't do that, the international community will continue to ignore us. I promise you. It was the same issue in 2017. It'll be the same issue if we do another referendum in 2030. The internal factors are so critical, because we may not realize that we think that the Kurdish issue is just ourselves. We're talking to one another, grieving. Everybody is paying attention to the Kurdistan region. Westerners, Americans, scholars, academic officials are paying attention to the Kurdish issue internally, internal politics. I'm not just talking about, oh, Turkey is invading Kurdistan. Internal politics is very critical. We have to be aware of it. To answer your question, I think of course, going back in history, from Kissinger, from the Gulf War, from recently the referendum and Afrin and Kirkuk, we can keep going in October. I think the United States and the Kurds do have a relationship. I think that there's a soft place in the Americans' heart for the Kurds. I think that does actually exist. I think, however, this has not been successfully translated into actual policy. And this was the mistake that we made, that the KRG made, that I warned about, is that, hey, yes, we have the saying in Washington is that the Kurds have friends in Washington. This may be true. We have many friends in Washington, from members of Congress to DOD officials to State Department officials. However, this does not mean they are pushing bills to support you militarily, economically. This is a huge difference. And this is what the misinformation that came out from the lack of independent media, especially from the clan ruling media, that the Americans support the Kurdish referendum and let's go full for it. This was a huge mistake. The Americans clearly, before it was held, months before, said that we do not support this referendum. Yet the Kurdish leadership went ahead. Now, moving forward, I think that, and this is a reason why I co-founded American Friends of Kurdistan, which is an advocacy and education organization based here in DC, because it was lacking. Kurdish leadership has been here for years. It was not able to create an independent organization that calls for the strengthening of the relations of Americans and Kurds. It does not exist. It did not exist until the AFK was done. If I was able to do it independently with my colleagues without any backing, why weren't you with millions of dollars that you already use to promote your own interests. This is something that, and comes back to the accountability point, is that we're now holding our representatives accountable. If we want American-Kurdish relations, the relations to be fruitful, we have to ask the KRG representative in Washington. Are they not the KRG representative in Washington? What is the result? If there is no result, then what's the point of having that office there, right? If there's no results, let somebody else do it. And this is not about this representative or any other representative. This is just basic common sense. Is that the conversations I'm having with members of Congress, it's very simple. The Kurds are, our representatives, the KRG representatives, are playing a victimhood narrative. They're also playing, when the National Defense Authorization Act comes out, it's this continued victim narrative that, hey, we're suffering, we need money. No, we don't. The Kurds don't need money. They need help building institutions. They need help building, tackling corruption. My advice would be for the KRG is stop asking for money. Because this is not going to solve your internal issues. Rather, have Americans, and I'm speaking from an American perspective because I'm here, and I don't really have much hope with the European states, but the American perspective is that they're ready to help you. From the conversations I've had, they're ready and able to assist you on many areas, whether it's economic, whether it's uniting the Peshmerga forces, whether it's investing in the youth. However, that's not where our intention is as far as the KRG. That's not what we want. We are trying to invest. When the KRG leadership comes to Congress, they're asking for assistance for the KDP or for the PUK, for individual assistance, not for the nation. And this is not wrong, because if this was wrong, the nation would have benefited from it already. We would have seen results already. You would have had support for the referendum in 2017. So I think in closing, I think there is a lot of hope to strengthen American-Kurdish relations. I think there is a strong bond between Americans and Kurds. The responsibility is on the KRG to refresh its policy, refresh its ideas. Don't go in there with a victimhood narrative, and be realistic. This is what you're going through. Ask them for assistance through that. Enough with asking for financial assistance.
Thank you so much, Diliman, for that detailed answer as much as time allowed. So let's go to the questions from some of the members of the audience, people who have been watching us so far. And we thank you, of course, for bearing with us for over an hour and a half. So the first question I would like to pose to you is by Banu Wahab. She says, when there is no strong opposition party, unrest in the region, disunity among Kurdish parties, federal government's attempt to reduce the entity of the Kurdistan region, people's despair, isn't an uprising close in the KRG? And I think that sort of sums up, the mood in a way, and a lot of what has been talked about so far in the panel as well. Do you see some sort of uprising close in the KRG? And I'd like to sort of expand this question and say, is it something that you think will work, and in what ways? Lauren, do you want to give it a go?
Sure. I think an uprising is probably too strong a word for anything that could manifest here. People for sure are in despair. There is a lot of opposition to the ruling parties, a lot of contempt with the government. But I think maybe one of the positives from this would be that this would propel the government to change its course. I do think that the more mistakes this government makes, like I said, the frequency, the intensity of the mistakes, there's only so much the people of Kurdistan can bear. You know, nowhere else in the world would people accept not receiving salaries for months on time or a reduction in salaries on time. I think the KRG government should be thankful that its people haven't really overthrown it already. But that doesn't mean to say that it's near collapse or an uprising is close. I would say that in the months to come, if there is no solution to the salary crisis, you will probably have more people out on the streets, more protests, and you probably see them in Holed and also in Duhok. The government needs to take action. I do believe they will take action. This isn't like years before. The people have had enough, and I do believe there'll be action taken by the government. In which form, and will it be satisfactory to the people? I don't know. But I also think that it cannot just be around the salaries. That is not enough. It's not enough to give people money and say, there you go. That just distracts them. It forces the focus to be purely on money when that's not what we need. We need capacity building. We need empowering institutions. We need to return to a Kurdish identity that's focused on patriotism, not nationalism. We need to believe in that Kurdish dream again of one day independence and the strengthening the rule of law. If we allow this conversation to be dictated and completely just pushed on this whole salaries issue, I think we're just going to lose the fight in the end, and this will just be a recurring cycle that we keep going through. And then when you turn around and the salary situation is fixed, but if all the other cogs in the machine of the Kurdistan Regional Government isn't fixed, we can't be content with that. We need to say, yes, salaries is a priority for now, because this, obviously impacts our day-to-day living, but we need empowered institutions. We need a stronger rule of law. We need accountability. Parliament cannot be shut down just like that. Immunity cannot just be lifted like that. People need to be held accountable, and a stronger stance on corruption. I mean, if I just quickly add,
well,
the Prime Minister.
I think, Lion, sorry, because we have another question. Let's see what our other panelists have to say, and then we'll take just another question. We're running out of time. Diliman, would you like to comment on that question? Is an uprising up and coming in Kurdistan?
I think, that uprising is not in the Kurds' interest. The stability, making the region very unstable. I mean, it's already a hostile region. Making it unstable is not the right path. We should never push towards that. But the leaders should ask themselves, if I am the Kurdistan Democratic Party, if I am the Patriotic Union of Kurdistan, do I not want my nation to succeed? Very basic. We have to go back to the basics. This is the thing, is that, and I keep emphasizing, is that we don't have the basics covered. An uprising is always likely. The Kurdish leadership should know that. That's a reality. If people have guns held to their head, that's the reality. If people don't have food to eat, that's the reality. Nobody wants that. That's the thing. We want Kurdistan to succeed, to be prosperous, to be successful. And I think the solution is, if the leaders have to have the nation's interest in mind. As of now, up until now, since 1992, they don't. And it doesn't look like they do. And if they don't, they should move aside and allow others to fulfill these positions, because they have good intentions and they have better intentions.
Thank you so much, Diliman. Kagbamo, what about you? Are you do you think an uprising is going to happen, or do you think that the path forward is really reforms, and whether that's possible? Which side of this binary on? Hello?
Hello. I think I was on mute.
Did you hear my question?
I did, yeah. I think
okay, good.
You probably know what stance I'm going to take by now. If it's not clear, I'll be very surprised. I've written articles that have been read millions of times about how a revolution is always on the brink. Do I recommend it? Definitely not. Do I condone it? 100% not. But you're looking at a Kurdish population at this period in time that have never been so kind of shamed or lived so shamefully, where they beg and borrow from paycheck to paycheck. And I always say that in life, you only get and receive what you tolerate. Now, the good thing that works for this Kurdish regional government is that the populace is very, very patient, or a lot more patient than any other European population. That's due to a number of things: our patriotism, our pride in being Kurdish, and even some of the allegiances between the population and what the two ruling parties have done historically, or what they've been perceived to have done. But you can't overlook the fact that in, let's say, 2005, 6, 7, people were rushing back to Kurdistan, had belief in prosperous Kurdistan. People invested a lot of money, Western money, in the Kurdish economy. Now it's the complete opposite. People are rushing, running, scurrying out of Kurdistan, and there's a massive mental health crisis that's getting worse and worse by the day. Now, when you purposely not give salaries on time and you use all these excuses, because we know the money's there, the wealth equality alone, and these elites who the paperwork shows where the money trails are going outside of Kurdistan, and when you don't provide basic services of electricity and water, and everybody is kind of just caught in this intellectual repression of getting by from day to day in a situation that's probably worse than a third world country, it's strange that a revolution hasn't occurred, right? But at the same time, I think it is the Kurdistan region is on, I've said it before, is on an egg timer that is already severely cracked. And I honestly think it's a closely watched situation. And I also think it's a situation that other foreign powers aren't too optimistic of, because I don't think after what happened in 2005, that foreign powers want to meddle in this region, because we saw when they brought liberalism what happened, and we've seen when this region had autonomy what these so-called patriotic leaders did. So I think if there's any sort of positive change, it's to come from two routes. One of them is the kind of
very briefly, please, very briefly, wrap it up in a minute.
I'm literally concluding. One of them is the kind of strangulation of support from without, and that can be achieved through the diaspora population and entities like AFK, which Kagdiliman has brilliantly done. And the other one is the uprising route. But I think there's small uprisings, social youth movements all the time, but when it fully escalates and unites is the key question.
Well, thank you so much. So let's go to the other question that we have. So just one moment. Yeah, Heather is asking, based on today's insightful conversations, what solutions, strategies can be offered to deal with the elitism/corruption that marginalizes motivated and capable Kurdish citizens, and what can be done, especially the foundation challenges. So, you know, the focus of the question is what can be done really to empower and elevate the youth? What kind of a role is there for the youth to play? And I hope everyone can, you know, keep it to no more than 2 minutes. Kagdiliman?
I think I mean, you know, it's very saddening that it has come to these conversations. But, you know, if we're talking about armed parties, it's difficult to face armed parties. If you're an average, ordinary Kurd and go on the street and protest just for not getting paid your salary, and then you have a security force coming at you that is protecting a group and a party, what do you do with that? So I think the approach I have taken, and I've realized this, you know, and you learn as you continue this work, is that we have to educate those that can't influence these clans and these tribes. We have to educate outsiders. We have to educate them on the real issues on the ground, that, hey, we do have corruption and it's a mess. It's a dire situation. Transparency is very, very important, and we don't have any of it. Nobody has been held accountable at all since 1992. Nobody has been held. Any of these issues that we've been going through, it would be considered treason in any other country if it were to happen today. And none of these parties would ever get elected anywhere else. But because they have armed parties, that's our biggest obstacle. So my advice to everybody and to our audience, listeners, Kurds or not, educate your educate your friends, your family, your representatives, members of Congress on the massive corruption inside the KRG, because I think this is their lifeline. It's the West. It's the financial assistance from the West, especially from the United States.
Well, thank you, Lavin.
Yeah, just a couple of points to go back to what Dr. Bamo said about Kurdistan being a third world country, some parts. I'm sorry, I live here. I have to disagree. That is not the case at all. I mean, I may be in a certain bubble, I will confess that, but I have friends and family who don't belong to my bubble. And yes, there is poverty, but it is not a third world country at all, just to make that point. In regards the what can we strategies and solutions do with elitism? Maybe we shift the conversation, maybe, right? Maybe the focus of this conversation has been on the ruling parties. They've done this, they've done. That's fine. We should not move that conversation, but maybe let's redirect our own focus. You know, what I think one of the issues is that our population, our youth, are not fully aware of some of the rights that are afforded to them. Maybe we raise their awareness, try to empower them with knowledge so that when they go to the ballot box, they can make a difference. And, you know, this is not something that is very specific to the Kurdistan region. We see the same in the US, we see the same in the European countries, in the UK. Empower your youth with knowledge that they can take to the ballot box. If there is fraud, if you have a large number of enough people coming out to vote, maybe you can counter some of that. That's one.
But Laura, if I just may intervene real quick, I think it was a PUK member that said, hey, either way, if we have 1 seat in the parliament or 100 seats in the parliament, we still have our forces and we're still gonna exist. That's something real, that it's a huge, that means they're not gonna take no for an answers, either us or you're our enemy.
No, I know who you refer to, and that was honestly quite a disgraceful comment to make, because that person is no longer in a real position of power. So hopefully that comment went with him. Secondly, there is corruption at the top, yes, but maybe one way to influence, as Dilman was saying, maybe we go to the second, third, maybe even fourth layers of people close to those people in power. You can have an influence. You can have an influence, you know, let's say I have an influence on certain groups in my circle. Maybe I can change their mindset. Maybe they can go with a different opinion to those higher up and higher up. And maybe one of these ideas will be implemented. And slowly and surely, I don't think it's just to go negatively completely and say, you know, that's this, you know, it's Kurdistan. It's okay. I'll leave it.
Sorry, I'll have to stop you here. Well, thank you so much, Bamo. Do you have? Would you like to add something to this question?
Just to kind of reiterate, I have conducted interviews with elites, decision makers, whatever you want to call them, of both of these ruling parties. Their mindsets are not changeable. You cannot educate these guys out of these beliefs. They see themselves as the Democrats and the Republicans, and they see this region as a kind of divine right to them and their families, right? So no matter how much you try to talk about reform and changing these mentalities and these mindsets, there's a lot of movements against this from within these parties, number one. Number two, I think they like the situation the way that it is, because they take criticism as if it's a burger or it's a khalu qaisi dish. They like it, they take it, they shrug it off, it's water off a duck's back. I honestly think, and this is based on research and in my book that's pending publication, which will explain all of this in further detail, the only way Iraq is going to be right, and that also includes its Kurdish region in terms of its institutions and its practices, is if it rewrites the rushed and divisive constitution that came about in 2005, because all that does is serve the 6 elite groups or political parties that the US worked with before the 2003 war. And unless that document is rewritten and a new precedent is set, then the same outcomes are going to happen. No matter how much you talk about reform, no matter how many faces change, they're all roots and they're symptoms of the same system. It's like patching up a dodgy foundation house. You're going to keep patching, but it's always going to be foundationally flawed. So that's my 2 pence on the subject.
Well, thank you so much. I think, what is emerging from this conversation, this really very fruitful conversation we have had so far, is the uniqueness of the Kurdish situation and the Kurdish case, right? Like a lot of what might work really in other places, in other parts of the world, might not necessarily work in Kurdistan, because, of the very difficult neighborhood where it is situated, and B, because, of the fact that Kurdistan is not a state. If, I definitely appreciate the sentiment and the desire for some sort of radical change within the Kurdistan region, and I hope that would happen, that it was going to happen. But I think the circumstances are also such that it really requires a much more measured sort of, plan of or course of action in terms of moving forward. And a lot of what, again, might, for example, work in places like Europe or other parts of the world, Asia, and is not going to necessarily work in Kurdistan. Even what can work in Iraq as such, Iraq minus the Kurdistan region, might not necessarily work within the Kurdistan region, because, like, if you, for example, look at the protests that have been going on in Baghdad and the south, those part of the country don't really have a problem of having, sort of the Iraqi entity collapsing as such, right? But in the case of Kurdistan, anything really, any sort of move that would lead to major turmoil and instability could provide a very easy excuse for Baghdad to send military forces, to deploy its military to the Kurdistan region. The West would probably, encourage or accept that just because of the fear of, further instability emerging in the country. And so, again, going to the point that I made earlier, some of the limitations that we are dealing with in the Kurdistan region are much more serious, much graver than, the rest of the world, or even places that are as dysfunctional as the state of Iraq itself. So, a lot of these, I personally don't buy a lot of these sort of binary takes on Kurdistan, where you have sort of democracy on one end, or dictatorship or authoritarianism on the other, or where you have a sort of prosperous economy on the one end and a failed and dysfunctional economy on the other end. And I think it's really important in terms of a spectrum, not in terms of a theory, and sort of try to pinpoint our location on the spectrum and, do our best to sort of move things forward. And that would definitely, not happen without a strong popular pressure, movement, protest movement, whatever you want to call it, from within the Kurdistan regions. So it's almost 4 o'clock here. We have had our 2 hours of conversation. And, I would like to thank our panelists, and I think it's time to bring it to an end. Thanks to all of our panelists, and thanks to all of you who have been watching and listening to us, especially those who were with us right from the beginning and stayed this far. So stay safe and healthy, everyone, and thank you so much again, and give a virtual applause to our panelists.